All right, welcome to the Big and SEC podcast. My name's Andy,
And I'm Jason.
and today we're going to be talking about the Big Ten quarterbacks, SEC quarterbacks, and the head coaches under the most pressure this season. So let's get started with the Big Ten quarterbacks. Just looking at the list of projected starters, woof, there's a lot. There's not a lot to be excited about. What do you think, Jay?
Well, Dylan Gabriel's at the top of the list. Inherits a good Oregon team that unfortunately couldn't win against Washington, or they probably would have made the playoffs. Drew Allar is up there. He gets help with Julian Fleming transfer in. If they get a good receiving core, he could definitely be at the top of the list.
Well, I think with Drew, it's going to come down to the new OC pretty much. If you watch their games, I'm a Penn State fan. If you watch their games, just nobody is getting open, and a lot of that has to do with scheme. With Colton Nicky there now as the OC, that's what's going to help him a lot. I'm looking at the list here of starters. You have a lot of unproven. Right now, Ohio State's projected as Will Howard, but I mean, there's a lot of noise about Julian Sayin, and the other ones, Aaron Noland, and the other ones in that quarterback room. So it's really tough to say with Ohio State. Whoever the quarterback is at Ohio State will be good just because they're Ohio State. And you're looking at a lot of newcomers into the conference. Miller Moss with USC, Aiden Childs for Michigan State. Neither one has really played a ton in college. You have MJ Morris at Maryland. He's going to be replacing Tua's brother over there. Haven't seen him play. Iowa's bringing back Cade as a returner. After that, I mean, the only other returners you have is Gavin Wimsatt with Rutgers, Hudson Card with Purdue, Luke Altmaier with Illinois, and Brendan Sullivan with Northwestern. After the first 2 or 3 guys in the Big Ten, there's a big drop-off, I feel like.
Yeah, and with the quarterback room of Ohio State, I think whoever the quarterback is going to be on a short leash. So they have a bad game or two, and it's next guy up because they cannot take another subpar season.
Good thing with that is their schedule is super light until Oregon hits, so they pretty much have until they play Oregon to figure out who their quarterback is.
Yeah. And, they have Will Rogers in like the top 5 on this list. I don't see that transferring very well. Coming from a Big 12 Kansas State team to a completely rebuilding Washington with a whole new coaching staff. It's not going to go well, especially with Big Ten defenses.
I thought Rogers was Mississippi State. Will Howard's Kansas State.
Yeah, I'm sorry, yeah.
But yeah, Will Rogers coming into a terrible situation. Everybody's gone. There's nobody left in Washington. Jedfish, new coach there, but like everybody's gone. There's nobody left.
And I think, and I honestly think Alex Orji is a bit underrated on this list just because of, they keep Sharon more, they promote Sharon more. So a lot of the offensive scheme is the same. And he plays a lot like JJ. And they bring back a good running back crew. And, they'll rebuild the offensive line just like last year and 2 years before that. So I think he'll climb up that list here shortly.
Well, all he's got to do is hand the ball off.
Exactly.
But they're going to get tested early with Texas early in the season. So we could see Michigan kind of get sidetracked early if they don't figure out the quarterback position. I think they could be a prime candidate for a transfer quarterback in the spring window. I don't know. Transfer portal opens on the 16th. I don't know. Nobody knows who's really going to get in.
Minnesota could get one too, right? Because that Max Brosmer, isn't he from like an FCS school?
Yeah. He was like he was really good last season.
Yeah.
Threw a ton of touchdowns. But it's system there for the most part. PJ Fleck has to find something on offense. he went to that Paul Soroka train again. Didn't quite work out, and then Soroka left for Rutgers last year. Basically, PJ Fleck. I mean, they rely on just like most teams in the Big Ten. They're defense heavy, and they just need a quarterback just to do enough. But last year, I mean, they just couldn't find any good quarterback play. Luke Altmaier for Illinois. I mean, we kind of got the gist of him last year. Nothing super special there. Curtis Rourke at Indiana could be interesting with their new head coach. Curtis Rourke came from the MAC at Ohio, put up huge numbers there. So he could be interesting to watch with Indiana, but Indiana's talent level as a whole is below most teams in the Big Ten. So it's hard to see a ton of success right away. And then you have Tyler Van Dyke transferring from Miami to Wisconsin. He's one of those guys that was actually projected a first-round pick before last season started, and he just kind of fell off last year.
Yeah, and I think Luke Fickell's kind of scheme fits more of his play style than it did Miami, but it's hard to say.
Yeah, and I mean,
like you said, he had his ups and downs. He had really good games. He had really bad games.
Right. You got Cade McNamara back for Iowa, hopefully healthy this year. I mean, if Iowa just gets average quarterback play, I mean, you're talking about a playoff contender with their defense.
Yeah, if they could score 2 touchdowns a game, they'd be right in it.
Right.
So I think Dylan Raiola will do pretty well in Nebraska as well with Matt Rule's, kind of air raid offense. I think he'll definitely bring a spark to that offense that they missed last year.
Well, right. As long as he doesn't turn the ball over, that's all. That's what killed Nebraska last year. Is Jeff Sims just did not want to keep the ball with Nebraska. With all the fumbles and interceptions, he was a kind of a turnover machine that derailed a lot of games for Nebraska last year. If I was going to rank quarterbacks for the Big Ten, it's hard to go with somebody different besides Dylan Gabriel at number 1, just because he's been there, done that. He's kind of the only one on the list that has. And then I know Will Howard's sitting at number 2 on this list. But I think you could just slot any Ohio State quarterback at number 2 in the Big Ten right now. And then Drew's probably the third best. And after that, I think you could pretty much put anybody between 4 and 8 and not really have a complaint, basically, because nobody's proven themselves.
Right. And like you said, Miller Moss will always be at the top of the list just because it's Lincoln Riley's quarterback. He's always going to put up stats, whether he's good or not.
Yeah, Lincoln's system's really quarterback friendly there. Will Rogers, like we said, if we're just going based on quarterbacks, he's going to be high up on the list, but you kind of have to take into effect the supporting cast, and I mean, we don't know who's there anymore.
Yeah.
I know there's a lot of buzz with Aiden Childs with Michigan State, with Jonathan Smith bringing him over from Oregon State. But it's just another one of those things where, he hasn't played football, let alone Big Ten football in college. So there's going to be a learning curve there. And if you look at how Michigan State fell off last year, unless they make a really big push here in the transfer portal, they have some making up to do in the talent aspect too, to keep up with Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, Oregon. It's going to be really hard for them to keep up too. So I think for my rankings, I'm going to go Dylan Gabriel 1, Ohio State quarterback 2, Drew Aller 3. I'm actually going to go Cade McNamara 4, just because he's experienced. And the team around him, they're not going to ask him too much. And then I will go, I guess I'll put Will Rogers number 5. Just because we've seen more of him than we have Miller Moss.
Yeah, that's understandable. Mine would look a bit the same with Gabriel at 1. Whoever Ohio State has at 2, obviously just always a high offense, efficient. I'd keep Alar at 3. And I would have to keep Miller Moss there at 4 too, just because again, it's just Riley's quarterback. No matter what, he's going to put up the stats. At 5, I like Alex Orji. Like I said, Michigan is going to just reload. It's not a rebuild. It's not a complete tear down like Washington. Like you said, they're keeping, they promote their offense coordinator. They always have a good offensive line. Like you said, I think he just plays very similar to JJ to where it should just be a plug and play for him. And I think he'll be pretty efficient. Like you said, just hand it off and throw it a couple times.
Right. They only need a couple completions a game, basically. Looking at their schedule, like we said, Texas before, that's going to be the measuring stick. I think that's week 2. So we'll learn a lot about Alex week 2 against Texas. So let's move on to the SEC quarterbacks now. A lot more talent in the SEC. You got a lot of returning starters and a lot of people with returning experience. Even if you look at, you got Carson Beck back, Quinn Ewers back, Jackson Dart's back, Jalen Milroe's back, Brady Cook's back, Connor Weckman's back. Nico's getting his start. Graham Mertz is back. Jackson Arnold saw some time last year. Garrett Nussmeier, he's been around, but he hasn't played a whole lot. He looked really good this spring. Vanderbilt's got Diego Pavia, a transfer who's played. Brock Vandegrift hasn't played a ton, but we know he's talented. Peyton Thorne's played a ton, but we just haven't seen much out of him. And then the unknowns or people we haven't seen a whole lot of is going to be out of Arkansas, Taylon Green, Mississippi State's Blake Shapen, and South Carolina's Lenore Sellers. So a lot more talent. The SEC's way deeper in quarterback play. And I think that's kind of why we see more offense in the SEC, and we kind of lean to the Big Ten being the defensive conference. I think a lot of that has to do with the top end quarterbacks aren't in the Big Ten.
Yeah, I agree with that. And like I said, it's just, almost half the league is bringing back some sort of veteran at quarterback. And, Brady Cook, he had a really good year last year. But they relied on the run to open up the pass a lot. So with them losing their running back, I see him kind of falling off that list a little bit as a returning starter. Obviously Carson Beck at Georgia. Obviously they missed the playoffs, which was kind of a, disappointment season for them. But him coming back, for sure is going to be a high efficient offense. Same thing with Quinn Ewers. Not a lot has changed in Texas. But one thing that's interesting to me is I think Brock Vandegrift will slowly move up this list at Kentucky. Kentucky has been very aggressive at the transfer portal. They got him from Georgia, and they got a handful of guys that are just completely rebuilding that program. And I think he'll be climbing up that list pretty steadily.
Yeah, if I'm looking at this list of, some of the people that are lower down, I think Garrett Nussmeier, he's obviously had the best spring game out of anybody here. But we're almost looking at Brian Kelly's offenses like Lincoln Riley's anymore with the type of season that the quarterback had over there last year. Forget his name. Who was the quarterback for LSU last year?
Daniels?
Yeah.
Jaden Daniels. Heisman winner.
I know. I just couldn't remember his name, but you look at the system there, and all of a sudden Brian Kelly has a super quarterback friendly offense and can't play defense. But I think Jackson Dart, with everything that Ole Miss has added in the portal, he's poised to have a giant year as well. And the schedule breaks down pretty nice for Ole Miss too. Quinn Ewers, we know, he's got Arch Manning kind of breathing down his neck if he slips up, but it looks like it's Ewers' job no matter what, kind of.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Ole Miss, I think, is a shoo-in for the playoffs this year. Obviously with the expanded playoffs. Um, but yeah, Ole Miss is another one. Lane Kiffin is a very good players coach. They want to come and play for him. Um, so he will always be aggressive in the transfer portal. Nico at Tennessee is also really interesting. Obviously, with Hupel's scheme, he's another quarterback friendly, high offense. And I think he's kind of a dual threat as well, so that will be interesting with that. With kind of more of like the Hendon Hooker a couple years ago when they were number one at one point. So he could definitely make a difference there in Tennessee. Um,
And they have the talent outside. They have the talent and skill positions to be as explosive as they want to be. The
yeah,
quarterback that, you know, you were kind of surprised to still see having a job to me is Peyton Thorne. I mean, he had a couple good years at Michigan State, transferred to Auburn, and just didn't look good last year facing the SEC defenses. Um, I think just like we talked about how Michigan could be in the market for a quarterback in the transfer portal if they don't love Orgy. I would probably look for Auburn as one of the transfer portal candidates too if a big quarterback gets in.
yeah, I agree 100%. And there's actually with the Lenora Sellers from South Carolina, he actually had a decent spring game. And with that offense, I think that he could be, not at the bottom, but he has the least experience on this list, like by far.
Right.
So it'll be interesting how he comes into it. He was just a 3-star recruit or a 3-star recruit, um, but he's had a strong spring, so it'll be interesting to see how he kind of develops um, in that Shane Beamer um, offense.
One guy I didn't see anything from last year is Jackson Arnold for Oklahoma. He played in a few games there, and I just don't see the hype yet. I know he was a freshman last year, so there's time to grow and learn and get better. But I just didn't see a lot out of him for him to be ahead of Garrett Nussmeier on this list, or Brock Vandegrift, who's looked a little bit better, shown something. But yeah, Jackson Arnold for me is kind of a guy that's like we really don't know what he is, even though he has some experience.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And like I said, if I were to rank these quarterbacks in the SEC, it would be Beck and Ewers 1-2. I feel like they could go either way with that. I think they both have solid arguments for one. At 3, I would actually put Jackson Dart. At 3, like I said, I think they are 100% committed. I think they will make the playoffs this year. And let's see. I think I'd put probably Jalen at 4. Just because Alabama's Alabama. They got a lot of talent down there. Um, and like Penix played really well in Washington's system. I think he kind of compares to Milroe a little bit.
And
So I could see him.
Milroe doesn't have the same arm, or I don't feel like Milroe's got the accuracy that Penix had, but
Yeah,
a good coach is gonna adjust his system to his quarterback.
yeah, exactly. And then let's see, for my 5th spot, I think I'm gonna go Nico, just because Hupel's offense is always, a high-powered offense. He's a young kid. I think he's really gonna prove his value here this year.
All right, if my ranking, I'm actually gonna go Ewers number 1, just because he's asked to do more basically. Georgia still is kind of in that game manager mode where Quinn Ewers is asked to win games basically. If he has a bad game, they're not necessarily going to win. Where Georgia's good enough, program wise, to where if Carson Beck has an off game, they'll still win. So I'm going to go Quinn Ewers number 1. I'm going to go Carson Beck number 2. I'm going to go Jackson Dart number 3. Then I am going to go Jalen Milroe, number 4. And I'm actually going to go Garrett Nussmeier, number 5, just because of how impressive he was in the spring game and how nice Brian Kelly's offense has been to quarterbacks. So that's going to be my top 5. Now let's move on to some coaches here that are going to be under the most amount of pressure this season. I think when making a list like this, you're looking at, expectations versus reality, and, who's made the playoff, who hasn't, who has to make the playoff or who has to beat a certain opponent this year. If you're looking in the Big Ten, I think one coach that has to make the playoff is James Franklin this year with it being expanded. They've always been, top 12, top 15 program, a couple years in the top 10. And now with that playoff going to 12 teams, I think the pressure is really going to be on James Franklin to make the first playoff for Penn State.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure. But like I said, at the top of this list, you have Ryan Day and Billy Napier at Florida. Ryan Day, he's gotta beat Michigan. He's gotta, regain beat the up north team, or he's gonna be in the hot seat for sure. You know, but even if he falls to Michigan again, he's still gonna make the playoffs. Ohio State will more than likely make the playoffs no matter what this year. So I don't know how much of a really, like how much that rivalry means for job security.
I think it's getting to the point where you lose 4 straight to Michigan as the Ohio State coach. You're going to be in trouble unless you bring the national title home. I think for Ryan Day, if he can beat Michigan, I mean, everything will kind of be fine. But if he loses to Michigan and doesn't bring home a national title, especially with how loaded they are this season, I mean, they hit the transfer portal hard. They're arguably one of the most talented teams in the country. If they fall to Michigan in a quote unquote rebuilding year, and then don't win the national title, I think Ryan Day, Ohio State could be looking for a new coach next season if he loses to Michigan. I think for sure. Another coach that's kind of like fallen off, or at least like the shine's fallen off of, is probably Lincoln Riley at USC. Especially with the way how he left Oklahoma kind of in the middle of the night, kind of left him hanging there in Oklahoma to go to USC. And then to kind of have the year they had last year where, you lose 5 or 6 games and you're supposed to be this, young mastermind. I think the pressure's on, especially moving to a Big Ten. I mean, you're going to be facing Big Ten teams, Big Ten defenses. There's not going to be a ton of shootouts in the Big Ten, which is kind of where USC thrives. I know they went and revamped that entire defensive staff, but I think Lincoln Riley is definitely going to need a lot better season than 6 or 7 wins in order to kind of keep the hot seat away from him. I don't think they'll get rid of him, but I think if they have another season where they lose 4 or 5, 6 games, I think Lincoln Riley's seat's going to start getting warm.
Yeah, especially since the talent's been there for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Even last year, he had a Heisman winner, projected number 1 overall draft pick, and like you said, you're just losing games. That can't happen. And USC has been desperate to find that next coach to bring them back to relevancy. That they've missed for years.
Right, since Pete Carroll left, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And I honestly thought when they hired him, people would just flock to that university and go, because it's just such a brand name of USC football. And like I said, I think with moving the Big Ten kind of eases his hot seat, just because like it's almost like an excuse, like, oh yeah, we switch conferences, it's a whole different type of football.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that might gain him a couple, an extra year or two if his seat does get hot. Another one, like I said, Florida. Billy has really underperformed than what they thought they were gonna get. And
Yeah,
again,
especially with the recruiting
he's
classes he's brought in. Like,
yeah, talent's there. It's just he's just been so poor. And I remember, I think it was last year they went on the road to Utah. I think it might have been the season opener, or like a couple games in, but that team was so unprepared for a high profile road game. Like it
mhm.
was just the ugliest type of play. Like they went like 0-6 on third downs. Had so many penalty yards. Like they were just so unprepared, and that falls on coaching. That's not nothing to do with the talent on the field. It's all on coaching. So I think he has the hottest seat coming in this year. He hasn't won. I don't think he's won a rival game since he's been there. I know he hasn't beat Georgia. I'm pretty sure he hasn't beat Florida State since he's been there. So, those are games that matter. You can have a bad season as long as you beat Georgia, as long as you beat Florida State, you're all right. But he's done neither. So I think he is definitely going to be gone after this year because I don't, they lost, their star running back in the transfer portal. I just don't think there's light at the end of the tunnel for this year.
Yeah. And like you look at coaches in the SEC, I really don't think that, Hugh Freeze is really under a ton of pressure with this only being his second season there in Auburn. I think he's bought himself enough time to at least get a couple recruiting classes under his belt before expectations get too crazy. Looking at like the rest of the conference, I mean, the only other coach I can really see, if things go sideways on him is, Arkansas Sam Pittman. I mean, that first season where he, took over, Arkansas did really well, kind of like that underdog story. But, there's only so many losing seasons that you can take, and they really weren't very competitive last year.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I think Arkansas is the type of school to where, they're just kind of the middle of the road on recruiting. So, like, they kind of need that type of personality coach to bring players in the transfer portal. And that's not happening with Sam Pittman. I mean, Sam Pittman can bring in, he's always has a good offensive line. But, it's just, like you said, it's just the talent is not there. I don't know if he's really on the hot seat. But it'll be interesting to see how it unfolds, how this season goes.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, money is there in Arkansas. I mean, they just hired Calipari, so um, obviously, there's some money there in Arkansas. And, if Pittman isn't the guy, college football nowadays, the leashes are shorter than ever on these coaches. Um, it'll
Yeah, and
be,
that's what I kind of see. I see PJ Fleck on this list too. And that's interesting to me because, he had a lot of hype coming to Minnesota, and I feel like he's kind of underperformed as coach.
yeah, I mean, he's kind of
Especially in
stuck
that
because,
weaker side of the division. I know now, now we're not, there's no divisions over in the Big Ten anymore. But over the last couple of years, that has been the weak side of the division or the conference.
Minnesota, I
And
mean, with Minnesota, they're weak in NIL. They don't really seem like you got to get on board with NIL anymore. So I think that's really limited him. And he's not that big personality to go get the 5-star, 4-star guys. I mean, over the last, couple years, anytime they sign a 4-star guy, Ohio State comes and swoops them up and they recommit to Ohio State. So it's Minnesota's a tough job. Same with Arkansas. These middle to lower tier programs, In the SEC and Big Ten, I mean, they're kind of stuck in between a rock and a hard place because there's only so many good to great coaches out there. And unless the university is fully there with NIL, it's going to be very hard to win at these places. I mean, you look at Arkansas; they're kind of getting poached through the transfer portal as well, um, more so than kind of anybody else on this list here. And that it speaks to these universities' NILs and how serious they're taking the new wild west of college football. And that's like to circle back to Penn State. They're not. They're okay in NIL, but James Franklin's kind of one of those. He's in the same kind of group as I would put Dabo Sweeney, where they're recruiting certain guys for the program, so they fit the program, but they're not getting those 5 stars like Ohio State is or Florida State. They're not or Georgia. They're not bringing in the top tier talent, so they're relying on development and keeping guys, which in the transfer portal, if some of these young guys aren't playing, they're going to go try and play somewhere else where, they'll get NIL and they'll get playing time. It's all about playing time. You can't have these super senior laden teams like, I think, like the Michigan national title last year. That's going to kind of be the outlier where they had 45 guys that were seniors or graduates. I don't think you're going to see that much more in the future of college football, just because guys aren't going to be willing to sit behind anybody anymore. College football is going to get kind of weird the next couple of years, and you're really going to see who the haves and have-nots are.
Yeah, I agree, and I was gonna put Dabo as a hot seat. I think he should be higher on that list, just because of his lack to evolve, with the transfer portal, and he set the bar high. He ended up making the national championship game like 3 out of 4 years, a handful of years back. So I mean, I feel like he set the bar high for himself, and now he is very underperforming, to a very um, high energy fan base. They're pretty extreme down there in Clemson, so I think he definitely gets on the hot seat, especially in the ACC. It's not a super strong conference. The last couple years, it's just basically been them, Florida State, and North Carolina. So
Yeah,
I feel like if he definitely doesn't make the playoffs or struggles to make the ACC championship game, he could definitely feel the heat.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at one coach where you could see things go completely sideways. I mean, look at Ole Miss. Just because of how many new people they brought in through the transfer portal and how they've kind of went all in for this year. If you look at last year, Lane Kiffin kind of, folded against Alabama and Georgia, their 2 losses. He really kind of went into a shell, and just Ole Miss did not look good against the 2 biggest opponents they had. I know they crushed Penn State in the bowl game, but bowl games don't mean what they used to with opt-outs, all that type of stuff. But if there was a team where it kind of went sideways, just because so many new faces in a new place, chemistry says a lot, and I mean talent wins games. But just you look at Lane's kind of track record, he really hasn't pulled off like that big signature win, really.
Right, I agree with that. Like you said, it's always been Alabama and Georgia knocked him off, and like you said, he doesn't coach the same way against those teams in those big moments. Um, so it's definitely interesting to see. But I think with the expanded playoffs, he easily makes the playoffs.
Yeah, and I mean, I think
Another. Go ahead.
well, I think this, if I remember right, Ole Miss's schedule lines up pretty nicely for them to make the playoffs. Um, but yeah, like it's just weird for me that Lane Kiffin he's not Lane Kiffin against the big dogs.
Yeah, exactly. Um, like I said, another name on this list that kind of surprised me is Marcus Freeman at Notre Dame. Um, obviously he had a couple hiccups early in his tenure at Notre Dame, but I think he's kind of coming into his own now. He's starting to get his own recruiting classes and stuff like that. And I think with the expanded playoffs, the goal is to make the playoffs. So, is Notre Dame consistently a top 12 team? I think so, absolutely. Now, I don't know really how it plays out with the format with all the conference
they'll
automatic
never
bids.
Yeah, with the automatic bids, they'll never get the first round bye.
They can't be a top 4 team.
Right, that no matter if they go 12-0, they cannot be a top 4 team because it goes to conference champions. So no matter what, they're playing that extra game and not getting that extra week of rest, which, it's kind of on them. All these other teams are playing conference championships. You're playing one less game, basically, a year. And I think
and I'm surprised. I'm surprised that they haven't joined the Big Ten or the ACC in the football conference at least.
Yeah, it's all money talks, and they have their own separate deal with NBC, which they're making same or more, and they get to keep that independence, and they get to schedule Stanford and Army and Navy, and they can get away with an easier schedule without a gauntlet every week in and out, by staying independent. Where if you look at the SEC or Big Ten, you have a couple bottom feeders, but for the most part, you're going to be in a dogfight every week, basically.
Yeah, for sure. And then Mario Cristobal too at Miami. That's just another program that has been desperate to find the face of the program to rebuild that back into what it used to be, especially over there in the ACC. I don't see a huge tide coming in his favor that he can turn this around. So like I said, I definitely think, he is going to be gone in the next year or two. If things don't drastically change over there in Miami. Florida is such a high recruiting state that, the talent's got to be there, and the coaching personality, and I'm assuming they have the NIL money to be competitive, to get those, to keep those players home, basically. So I definitely see that one of the highest hot seats on this list for sure.
Yeah, he's definitely put all of his eggs in the Cam Ward basket, which, I mean, he looked good in the spring game too. But there's a lot riding on Cam Ward. Mario Cristobal, he needs a quarterback that runs his system. He's one of those coaches that he has to recruit his system. He's not very good at adjusting, and he's made many in-game mistakes as far as coaching goes too. So when he was doing really well at Oregon, he was out talenting people and out systeming people. He doesn't have that personnel quite yet, but he's building on it. But yeah, this is a big year for Mario Cristobal in Miami too.
Not to put you on the spot, but do you think that there is a coach not on this list that should be?
Not really. I think it pretty much highlighted every coach that you're kind of looking at there. I mean, there's a lot of new coaches too going on right now. So you got to take that into effect too. But yeah, I don't think there's really a coach here that's not listed that's going to be really on the hot seat. But yeah, so that should do it here for episode 1 of the Big and SEC podcast. Thanks for joining us, and like always, like, subscribe, and review. Thank you guys for watching.
Thank you.